The palace was waking. Soft light filtered through the high lattice windows, brushing the stone paths with morning gold. Courtyards stirred with quiet movement. Sleeves of silk fluttering, sandals clicking lightly against wood. Incense rose from unseen corners, but in the apothecary wing near the Hall of Fragrance the world was still hushed. That was where Elin Hua preferred to be. She moved carefully through the corridor, a small lacquered tray balanced in her hands. On it, a porcelain teapot with cracks along the base and 2 clay cups. Steam rose faintly, carrying the sweet scent of osmanthus and goldenroot. Her robe was simple, pale green with darker cuffs, tied at the waist with a faded sash. Her dark, brown hair was tied into a modest knot at the nape of her neck, slightly uneven, like she'd done it in haste. She wore no jewelry, no paint on her face. She was not important, just an apothecary, one of many. But she knew herbs better than most, and how to steep tea that calmed trembling hands. Her fingers were gentle, her voice quieter than the garden breeze, and above all else she knew how to stay invisible, which, in a palace full of secrets, was a gift. Elin turned left instead of right, toward the plum grove, a place most avoided. They said the trees were cursed, that they had once bloomed in winter during a royal death, that crows gathered there even in sunlight, that those who lingered too long would lose something they couldn't name. Elin didn't care. The plum grove was peaceful, and that morning, she wanted peace. She stepped past the stone gate. That was when she saw him. At first, only the edge of deep blue silk, soaked at the hem and torn at the side. Then a hand pressed tightly to his ribs. Then the figure of a man slumped near the base of the tree, hidden by low branches. She froze. His head was lowered, his breathing short and uneven. A mask covered. His face, black, made of cloth, tied behind the ears. Only his eyes were visible, and they were watching her, sharp, alert, but not cruel. Elin's heart pounded. She should have turned back. She should have called someone. But instead, she stepped closer. "I have tea," she said softly. No reply. She knelt anyway, setting the tray gently beside him. The cups clinked faintly, and the steam curled between them like a thread of silk. "It helps with pain," she added, barely above a whisper. Still, he said nothing, only watched her. She lifted one of the cups and offered it with both hands. His gaze flicked between her face and the tea. Then slowly he reached out. His fingers were scraped. A fine tremor passed through them. But he took the cup. He drank, one sip, then another. Elin opened her satchel and pulled out a strip of cloth and a sprig of moonleaf, good for closing wounds. "Forgive me," she murmured, reaching toward his side. He didn't stop her. His robe parted just enough to reveal a gash beneath the ribs stained with blood. Deep. Fresh. Elin didn't ask what had caused it. She only worked. Her fingers moved with quiet urgency. Wiping, pressing, binding. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep her focus. The tea cooled beside them. Time passed in birdless silence. When she finished, she sat back on her heels. "I don't know who you are," she said. He tilted his head the slightest movement. "And I don't need to." She stood. The wind brushed the back of her neck. She turned to go. "Wait." His voice was low, rough, but steady. She paused. "Your name?" he asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "Elin," she said. "Elin Hua." He nodded once, that was all. She left the tray behind and walked away, her hands still stained with blood, her chest too tight to name the reason why. That night she couldn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, but because the image of him, masked, silent, and wounded, wouldn't leave her mind. Something about him had unsettled her. Not the danger, not even the wound, but the way he drank the tea, as if it were the first warmth he had tasted in years. And deep down, Elin knew this was not over, and she was right. Elin woke before the sun. The small room behind the apothecary hall was still, touched only by the faint scent of herbs and soot. Her hair was tangled from restless dreams. She hadn't lit the lamp. She didn't need to. The air already felt different, as if the world was holding its breath. She sat up slowly, listening. Nothing. But the silence was too clean, too deliberate. Then, 3 knocks. Sharp, precise. Elin stood and crossed the floor barefoot. She opened the door. 6 men stood outside. All wore black robes, no insignia. But their posture said enough. Not servants, not guards, soldiers. The one in front bowed slightly. "Elin Hua?" he asked. Her voice caught. "Yes. You're to come with us," she blinked. "Why?" He held up a scroll. The seal was unmistakable. A coiling black dragon with no eyes. Only one person used that seal. The 4th prince. Elin's mouth went dry. I think you have the wrong person." The man didn't answer, only stepped aside. "We've been ordered to escort you. Now." She looked behind her. The narrow bed, the half-packed herb bundles, the single cracked teacup on the windowsill. Then she stepped forward. No one saw them move through the halls. The palace was still asleep, or pretending to be. Their boots made no sound. Their presence was like mist. Impossible to track. Impossible to forget. Elin followed in silence, her hands folded in front of her to keep them from shaking. She had never been summoned by anyone of rank. Apothecaries did not receive royal orders, especially not from someone like him. They passed through gates she had never seen, under arches, carved with dragons and cranes, past guards who saluted without a word. The path curved sharply at the end, and there, behind a wooden archway painted in faded jade, was a quiet pavilion surrounded by plum trees. The guard stopped. The lead one turned to her. "He is waiting inside." Then, without ceremony, they vanished. Elin was alone. She stood before the door, unsure if she should knock or run. Before she could do either, the door opened. A silent attendant stepped aside. Elin stepped in. The scent of sandalwood and old tea leaves filled the air. The room was bathed in soft golden light. Long silk drapes swayed gently. The walls were lined with scrolls and shelves of porcelain. At the far end, seated in a carved wooden chair, was him, the man from the garden. His robe was darker now, black with thin silver threads at the cuffs. His hair was brushed and tied back, revealing more of the mask. It was still simple, still black, still hiding everything but his eyes, but she knew it was him. His gaze met hers. "Elin Hua," he said. His voice was the same, quiet, low, like wind through reeds. She bowed. "Yes, my lord." "I remember you." She straightened slowly. "You do?" "You offered tea and said nothing more." Elin swallowed. "I didn't know who you were. That's why I trusted you." She looked at the floor. Her breath came shallow. "I wasn't supposed to find you," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I'm glad you did." He stood. Elin instinctively took a step back, not in fear, but from habit. In the palace, power took space, and this man was power. But his movements were measured, calm. "I brought you here for one reason," he said, "because no one else spoke to me the way you did, without fear, without demand." She hesitated. "I was only doing what felt right." He nodded once. "And that is exactly why I want you to stay." Her brow furrowed. "Stay?" "In this pavilion," he said, "as the healer attached to my household." Her lips parted, but no words came. "I have more wounds than the one you wrapped," he added. Elin's voice was barely audible. "And if I say no," his answer came after a pause, "then I will thank you for the tea and let you leave untouched." She searched his eyes. They weren't cold, but they were unreadable. Then she said, "What would I need to do?" He gestured to a corner table, already prepared with scrolls, jars of herbs, and a tea set much finer than her old one. "Brew tea, watch the weather, stay. Elin looked at the window. The garden beyond was still safe. "I'll stay," she said quietly. He nodded once, then added more softly, "Thank you." That night, Elin was given a room behind the pavilion. It was small but clean. The bed had silk sheets. A robe had been laid out for her, darker than the ones she usually wore, but simple, respectful. There were no locks on the door, but there were no guards outside either. Still, she didn't feel free. She felt chosen, and somewhere deep in her chest that frightened her more than anything. She didn't sleep much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. The black mask, the eyes that watched like they remembered too much. And somehow, even in silence, she knew this was only the beginning. The sun rose soft and pale over the pavilion. Elin stood by the window of her new room, watching the wind move through the plum trees outside. Her fingers curled around the handle of a porcelain teapot, still warm from the morning fire. No one had come to check on her. No servant knocked. No guard stood watch. She wasn't a prisoner, but she wasn't free. She brewed the tea as she always did, careful, quiet, measuring each leaf with the precision of someone who knew how. Little it took to heal or to harm. When she stepped into the main hall, he was already there. The prince. Kael. He stood with his back to her, hands folded behind him, staring at the koi pond just beyond the silk-draped windows. His black robe hung loose around his shoulders. The mask remained. "Elin," he said without turning. She stopped. "Yes, my lord. I told you not to call me that." She hesitated. "Then what should I call you?" He turned, and for the first time, he answered, "Kael." She repeated the name in her mind. Kael. It didn't feel royal. It didn't feel distant. It felt quiet, solid, unadorned. "I made osmanthus again," she said, lifting the pot. He nodded. They sat at the low table in the center of the room. 2 cushions, a long silence. Elin poured the tea. Kael watched the steam rise but didn't drink yet. "This place," he said after a while, "belonged to someone else once." She looked up. "My mother." Elin didn't speak. "She was not a noble," he continued. "Not when she arrived, but she had eyes like yours. Calm, tired, watching everything." He took a sip. "She built this tea house when she realized the palace had no space for grief." Elin's fingers stilled on the rim of her cup. "She came here when my father ignored her, when the court mocked her accent, when the officials laughed behind her back." Kael set the cup down. "She called it the place for ghosts." Elin swallowed softly. "Because no one else came here?" "No," Kael said, "because it was the only place she could still feel alive." Outside, the wind brushed gently against the window lattice. "I'm sorry," Elin said. "For what?" "That she was treated that way." Kael looked at her. "You don't even know her." She met his gaze. "I don't have to." A beat of silence passed. Then Kael rose. "Come with me," he said. She stood, uncertain. He led her through the side corridor, past a row of faded tapestries, through a wooden arch painted with plum blossoms and down a winding stone path barely touched by foot traffic. The trees here grew old and crooked, branches gnarled from wind and age. Moss blanketed the stones. Petals lay like silk along the edges of the path. At the end stood a small structure, half tea house, half shrine. Wooden, worn, but beautiful. In its stillness, he opened the door. Inside, it smelled of time. Books lined the walls. Old jars of dried leaves sat untouched. A single chair faced the window with a long-forgotten robe draped neatly over its back. "She used to read here," Kael said. To herself, to no one. She said stories didn't need ears to matter. Elin walked slowly along the shelves, her hand brushing across the worn spines of scrolls. One had a faded ribbon tied around it. "She died when I was 12, Kael said. The words came out flat, practiced, like he'd said them too many times in his head. After a pause, he added, "No one lit incense for her. They only lit it to erase her name." Elin turned. She met his eyes and saw something beneath the stillness, grief that had never been named, not with a crown, not with a ceremony, only with silence. "She would have liked your tea," Kael said. Elin gave a soft smile. "I hope so." He stepped closer. Not too close, just enough for his voice to soften. "I didn't bring you here because I need a healer." She blinked. "Then why?" "Because this place was dead, and you made it breathe again." Outside, a bird called. Somewhere far off, a bell rang, but inside the tea room there was only the scent of osmanthus and the warmth of two people sitting quietly in the space between sorrow and stillness. Kael poured her a cup of tea, and Elin stayed. Not because she was asked to, but because something inside her had started to bloom. Gently, impossibly, like plum blossoms in winter. The nights in the pavilion were darker than any Elin remembered. There were no bells marking the hours, no footsteps outside her room, only the slow creak of old wood and the distant rustle of wind through plum trees. She had grown used to the silence, but not the feeling that came with it, the sense that someone, somewhere was watching. It began with a flicker, a shadow, in the corridor. Then the next night, a cup misplaced. She always set it to the left of the tea tray. Now it was on the right. She told herself it was nothing. But on the third morning, a small piece of parchment slid beneath her door. No seal, no signature. Just 5 words, written in a hand she did not recognize. "They are watching you now." Elin stared at the message for a long time, then folded it once, slowly, and placed it beneath her pillow. She didn't tell Kael. Not yet. Instead, she went about the day as if nothing had changed. She swept the stone steps of the tea house. She organized the herb jars. She brewed a soft chrysanthemum blend for his afternoon cup, just as she had every day for the past week. But her hands shook when she poured the water, and Kael noticed. He always did. "You're holding your breath," he said gently that evening. They were seated beneath the old willow tree, the one whose roots curled like fingers around the earth. The lantern beside them cast warm light over his mask and her folded hands. Elin looked away. "I'm fine." "No," he said. "You're not." She hesitated, then spoke. "Someone left me a note." Kael turned slightly. "What kind of note?" She reached into her sleeve and handed him the parchment. He read it once, then again. His fingers folded around the paper tightly. "Did you see who left it?" "No," she said, "but it was there at dawn." Kael's voice turned quiet, cold. "Describe the handwriting." She did. Careful, steady strokes, but the ink bled just slightly, as if written in haste. Kael stood. "Pack your things," he said. Elin blinked. "What? You're not staying here anymore." She rose to her feet. "But why? Isn't it safer here?" "No," he said. "Not anymore." She hesitated. "And where will I go?" Kael looked at her, long and steady. "To my quarters." Her breath caught. "But that will make things worse. The whispers will grow, louder." "I don't care," he said. "They can whisper, they can burn their tongues." She had no answer for that. So that night, under the cover of dusk, she gathered her satchel and followed Kael through a narrow corridor to the inner residence, the private wing where only members of the Imperial line ever stepped. The doors were carved with phoenix feathers and lined with gold, but inside the space was quiet, lived in. Books stacked on tables, blank scrolls on the floor, a bowl of untouched tea gone cold on the sill. Kael led her to a room at the back. It smelled of cedar and dried plum blossoms. "This was hers," he said. Elin turned. "Your mother's?" He nodded once. "She used to sit by that window," he said, pointing, "and say nothing for hours. And still, I think she saw more than the entire court combined." Elin placed her satchel gently near the bed. "No guards?" she asked. "No," he said. "They wouldn't dare come here." There were no locks, but she didn't feel exposed. She felt claimed. Kael turned to go, then paused at the door. "Elin." "Yes?" "I don't know who left that message, Yet, but I do know this. I won't let anything happen to you." And with that, he disappeared into the hall. Elin stood alone in the room of a dead woman, heart beating fast, surrounded by the scent of old secrets and warm tea. She did not sleep that night, but she wasn't afraid, not anymore. The next morning, the sky hung low and gray. Mist moved through the palace grounds like silk slipping between fingers. Elin stood at the window of her new room, the room that had once belonged to a forgotten woman, now her own, and watched the fog blur the garden path. She had not spoken to Kael since the night before, and yet she felt his presence everywhere. In the folded blanket on the bench, in the fresh jasmine, branches placed near the door, in the quiet that no longer felt lonely. She turned toward the dressing table where a wooden box had been left during the night. No note, no seal, just a small lacquered box resting on the polished surface. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a ribbon, silk, deep blue, embroidered, with silver threads, clouds winding around a single dragon, its body coiled and mouth open in silence. It shimmered like moonlight. Elin touched it with careful fingers. It was beautiful. Too beautiful for someone like her. She hadn't worn anything that delicate since she was a child. Behind her, the door creaked open. She turned quickly. Kael stood there. He wore no robe of gold, no crown, just a plain dark garment with wide sleeves and his ever-present mask. He stepped inside, arms folded behind his back. "That was hers," he said softly. Elin looked down at the ribbon. She wore it when she came to the gardens. It was the only thing she ever asked to keep. Elin's voice came quiet. "Then why give it to me?" Kael moved closer. "Because you make this place feel like hers again." She didn't know what to say. She didn't want to ruin the silence. So she did what felt right. She closed the box and held it in both hands, like a gift that was too sacred to open twice. "I can't wear it," she said. "Not yet." He nodded once. "When you're ready." They stood in silence for a while. Then Kael gestured toward the door. "Come," he said. "I want to show you something." They walked side by side through the corridor, neither speaking, their footsteps soft against the stone. The fog had begun to lift slightly, revealing hints of color in the trees, a slow blooming of spring. He led her back to the small tea house where they had first spoken of his mother. But this time, the shutters were open, fresh cushions laid, a brazier lit in the corner. On the table, a new tea set had been placed, white porcelain with a blue dragon curled along the rim. He sat first, then motioned for her to do the same. Elin poured the tea. Kael watched her fingers move. "You remind me of her," he said, not in face, in presence. She looked up. "Did she speak often?" "Only when it mattered," he replied. She believed words were like tea. They should be warm, steeped in patience, and never wasted. Elin smiled softly. Kael tilted his head. "What are you thinking?" "That she must have been very loved." He looked down at the cup. "She wasn't." Elin's breath caught. "Not the way she deserved," he added. She didn't press. She only reached for his hand across the table. She didn't touch it, just placed hers near enough that he would feel the invitation. He didn't take it, but he didn't move away, and that, in the world they lived in, was already everything. When she returned to her room later, the ribbon still sat in the box. She didn't wear it, but she laid it beside her bed. And that night, for the first time in many years, Elin Hua dreamed not of loneliness, but of a man behind a mask and a tea house where ghosts could rest. 2 mornings later, a black lacquered scroll arrived. The attendant who delivered it said nothing, only bowed, left it in Kael's hand, and vanished like mist. Elin was in the inner garden when he read it. She saw the way his posture stiffened, the way his fingers curled slightly around the edge of the paper. He stood silent for a long time, his mask tilted just enough to hide his eyes. When he finally turned, she was already beside him. He handed her the scroll. It bore the imperial seal. The message was simple. The Emperor requests the presence of the fourth prince at council. At once. Elin felt her breath tighten. Kael's hand hovered at his side. Then he turned, walking toward his quarters with a calmness she didn't trust. Inside, she helped him. Dress. It was the first time she had touched the ceremonial layers. Dark silk, embroidered edges. The high collar that closed like armor. Each fold weighed more than the last. He didn't speak. But when she reached to fasten the sash, her fingers trembled slightly. Kael placed his hand gently over hers. "Elin," he said, his voice low. "I don't want you to leave the pavilion today." She looked up. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. "I don't know yet." Her hands fell to her sides. "I'll wait here," she said quietly. Kael studied her face, long, as if trying to memorize her. Then, just before he turned, she reached for his mask. Her hand paused in the air. "No," she whispered. "Let them see you." Kael didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered the mask and left it on the table. Elin watched him walk away. Bare-faced, back straight, silence coiled, around him like a second robe. And when the doors closed behind him, the air felt colder. She spent the day in the tea house, brewing blends she didn't serve, grinding roots she didn't need, listening for footsteps that never came. By dusk, the lanterns were lit. Still, he didn't return. Then, a shadow at the gate. The door opened. Kael stepped in. His robe was torn at the hem, his sleeve stained dark where it had brushed against something rough. He wasn't bleeding, but he looked frayed, like a thread pulled too tight. Elin ran to him. "You're hurt." "Not badly," he said. He sat down heavily, removing the outer robe. She knelt beside him, checking his wrists, his collarbone, the scrape along his shoulder. Her hands moved quickly, but her breath came slow and deliberate. "What happened?" she asked. Kael leaned back. "They want me to leave this place." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "They want me visible, obedient. Back in the main court, among them." Elin paused. "And you said—" "I said no?" She smiled, small but real. "Good." Kael let out a quiet breath, but then his voice changed. "And what will you do?" he asked, "if they make me choose?" She looked up. "Choose between what?" "Between power and peace." Elin's throat tightened. She sat beside him, her voice soft. "Then I hope you choose what your heart needs." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, and for the first time, his hand found hers. Not gently, not hesitantly, but with purpose. His fingers curled around hers like something decided, and neither of them spoke again for a long time. Because sometimes the heart speaks best in silence. The morning after Kael's return, the air in the pavilion had changed. It wasn't colder, just heavier, as if the walls knew what had been said the night before, as if they too were waiting. Elin moved through the rooms as always, cleaning the ink brushes, arranging herbs, steeping the tea with her usual care. But her fingers were slower, her breath shallower. She kept thinking of his hand over hers, the pressure of it, the stillness after. It hadn't been an accident. And that, more than anything, made her heart ache in a way that frightened her. By noon, Kael hadn't left his chambers. But someone had left something for her. A servant she didn't know, silent and stone-faced, appeared with a small bundle wrapped in deep blue silk. He placed it on the corner of the tea table, bowed, and vanished. Elin stared at it for a long time, then unwrapped it. Inside was a second ribbon, softer than the first, slightly worn at the edges. The dragon was no longer silver, but white, faded from time, but embroidered by hand. Her breath caught. Kael had given her something precious before, but this was personal, used, beloved, and offered without a word. That evening she found him beneath the willow tree, where the wind moved like a river through its long green arms. He sat cross-legged, robes loose, eyes closed, listening, or remembering. She knelt beside him, held out the ribbon in both hands. "I can't accept this," she said. Kael opened his eyes. "You already did." Her voice faltered. "It's hers." He nodded. "Yes." "Then it should stay with you." He looked at her, not with command, not with pleading, just quiet insistence. "When my mother knew she was dying, he said, she gave this to me. She said, one day give it to someone who sees you as I do, not as a prince but as a son, as a man, as yours." Elin's heart was loud in her chest. Too loud. She lowered her hands. "I don't know if I'm—" "You are." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to, because Kael reached forward and tied the ribbon into her hair himself. He was gentle, careful, almost reverent. When he finished, she felt the weight of it resting at her nape. Not heavy, but grounding, like a seal, a bond. A name written without ink. They sat in silence for a long time. The lanterns above them flickered. The wind whispered across the floor. And somewhere in that silence, Elin Hua realized she had stopped waiting for him to choose between peace and power. Because he already had, and he had chosen her. The storm came at night. It arrived without warning. Wind hammering against the pavilion walls, lanterns swaying, branches clawing at the windows like restless ghosts. But inside, it was still. Elin sat in the tea room, the same room where Kael had first told her about his mother. The brazier glowed low and the scent of roasted barley drifted faintly through the air. She didn't flinch at the thunder. She only listened to the rain. Kael entered without a word. His robe was damp at the shoulders and a fine line of water ran down the side of his jaw. He shook it off as he stepped in, closing the door behind him. "They've summoned me again," he said. Elin didn't turn. "They're growing impatient," he added. Still, she said nothing. Then softly, "You don't owe them anything." He moved closer, each step slow. "I owe you an answer," he said. That made her look up. Kael's eyes held the quiet of someone who had made a decision long before he dared say it aloud. "I won't return to the main court," he said. "Not for them, not for titles, not for fear of their whispers." Elin's breath came slowly. "They say I've gone soft," he continued, "that I hide here like a wounded child, that I've let a healer with no name wrap herself around me like a vine." His gaze stayed steady. "And maybe I have." She blinked once, then twice. "But if they had tasted your tea," Kael whispered, stepping close enough for his voice to reach only her, "they would understand why I stayed." He sat beside her, reached for the cup she had poured, drank. The silence stretched. Then, "I was dying the day we met," he said. Elin looked at him. "Not just from the wound," he added, "from everything else, the weight, the masks, the crown that no longer fit." He set the cup down. "But you didn't ask what I was." "I didn't need to," she said. "No, and that's why I lived." Elin folded her hands in her lap. "I still have nothing to offer," she said. "No name, no family, no place in the records." Kael turned toward her. "You offered tea." His voice softened. "And I never forgot the taste." The wind rattled the shutters again. The storm raged. But it no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like something being washed away. Later that night, they lit no lamps. They sat by the window watching the storm pass over the palace. And when Kael reached for her hand, he didn't ask for permission. He simply held it. Because some choices are not loud. They are made in silence, in a cup of tea, in a hand reached for and accepted, in the ribbon tied behind a quiet woman's neck. Years later, they would still walk through the plum grove at dawn. No one would call her empress. She never wore gold. But every morning, Kael asked for her tea with the same words, "Elin," just like that first time. And she would smile, pour, and know she had never needed to be anything more than exactly what she was. The woman who stayed, the one who listened, the one who gave tea to a masked prince and changed everything.
If this story stayed in your heart even after the last line, don't just scroll away, leave a comment. Even a single word means more than you know. And if you felt something, anything, subscribing means the world to us. It's how we know these quiet stories still matter. Thank you for being here, truly.